The building I was hired to catalog evidence from had been torn down 11 years before I ever set foot near it. I know how that sounds. I didn't believe it either. I thought it was a clerical thing, the kind of mistake that happens when a county moves paper from one basement to another and nobody updates the header. That's what I told myself while I signed the contract. The header said Property and Evidence Control, Halstead Street Station, 4th Precinct, and Halstead Street Station had been a gravel lot behind a chain-link fence since I was in my 20s. The manifest was real, though. 940 boxes. My name on the second page as the contract archivist, and a line at the bottom about how any discrepancies were to be logged, not corrected. I read that line 4 times before I understood it wasn't grammar. It was an instruction. By the time I understood what it meant, I'd already opened the first box, and the first box had a date on it that came after the building was gone. Let me back up. I want to tell this in order, because the order is the only part I still trust. My name is Daniel Roeder. I'm 38. I used to think I'd have a career by now. Something with a title, but what I actually have is a skill that got cheaper every year I did it. I catalog things. Record. Evidence. The physical guts of institutions that are trying to go digital without paying full price. I scan. I tag. I box. I shelve. I'm the guy they bring in when a hospital or a court or a sheriff's office finally admits the basement is a fire hazard and they need one careful person to make it a spreadsheet. I got good at it during a bad stretch. My marriage ended the same year my mother's did, hers by way of a stroke, mine by way of a quiet Tuesday where Jenna said she'd already found an apartment. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it explains why, when a woman named Miss Ferreira from the county's records division called me about a 3-month contract with a rate that was almost double what I usually got. I didn't ask the right questions. I asked one. I asked why it paid so much. Chain of custody, she said. Evidence is different from records. If a box is logged wrong, a conviction can get overturned. We need someone who won't cut corners. That made sense. That's the thing about the whole job. Every single piece of it made sense, right up until it didn't, and by then I was already inside. I asked where the work was. She gave me an address out past the industrial park, a county annex I'd never heard of, and told me to report to a Mr. Alvarez at 7. She said to bring my ID, my own gloves, and a light jacket because the climate control ran cold. Her voice had a flatness to it, the patience of someone reading from a page. And once, just once, she called me Danny instead of Daniel. I put it down to her having my file open in front of her. Nobody but my brother had ever called me that. I noticed it, and I let it go. I was good at letting things go by then. She didn't say the station the evidence came from was gone. Why would she? That was on the paperwork, and I hadn't read the paperwork yet. When I tried to call the number back that night to ask a question I'd already forgotten, it rang once and went to a tone I didn't recognize. Not disconnected, not voicemail, just a long, flat note, like a phone left off the hook in an empty room. I told myself the county's phone system was old. I told myself a lot of things that first week. The annex was a long, low building the color of wet concrete, set back from the road behind a parking lot built for 100 cars and holding 4. No sign. Just a number stenciled by the door and a card reader that had been installed recently enough that the drywall around it hadn't been repainted. Alvarez met me in the lobby. He was maybe 60. Heavyset, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and the specific tiredness of a man who has explained the same thing too many times. He shook my hand and said he was glad they'd found somebody, and something about the way he said "found" made me look at him a second longer than I meant to. He walked me through the intake procedure like a man reading a liturgy he no longer believed. Badge in, badge out, never remove a box from the floor. Every box gets logged when you open it, and logged again when you close it, and the 2 times get written down. You'll get boxes that aren't on the manifest, he said. Don't try to fix it. Don't add them. Just note them in the discrepancy log and keep moving. Where do the extra boxes come from? He looked at me the way you look at someone who's asked a question you're not allowed to answer honestly. Transfers, he said. It's a big system. Things get shuffled. Then he gave me the last rule, and he gave it differently than the others. He slowed down. He made eye contact. You work until 6, he said. The building's yours after that if you want the extra hours, and the rate's the same. So people do. But the log closes at 2 in the morning. If you're still here at 2, you stop logging. You leave anything you're holding on the table, you badge out, and you go home. You do not sign anything into the system after 2. Not one box. What happens at 2? The system does a sync, he said, which was such an ordinary IT department, completely deflating answer that I actually laughed a little, and he didn't laugh with me. He walked me back to the floor. Rows of steel shelving under fluorescent light. The hum you stop hearing after 10 minutes. The cold he'd warned me about. 940 boxes, brown and identical, each with a barcode and a case number and a date. First one's on the table for you, he said, and left me there. I told myself it was a good job. I told myself the money was real and the work was simple, and I was lucky. I believed all of that for about the length of time it took me to lift the lid off box 1. The box held a woman's purse, sealed in plastic, with a case number that meant nothing to me and a lot number that did. Because the lot number carried a date. Evidence gets a date when it enters custody, when the property clerk takes it in and signs for it. That's the moment the object stops belonging to the world and starts belonging to the case. The date on that purse was March of a year that was 3 years after Halsted Street Station was demolished. I stood there holding it. I want to be honest about what I felt, which was not fear. It was the small, irritated satisfaction of catching an error. There it is, I thought. Somebody fat-fingered the intake date. This is exactly the kind of thing I'm here to catch. I got out my pen and the discrepancy log and I wrote it down because that's what Alvarez said to do. Log it, don't fix it. Then I opened box 2. Box 2 had a date after the demolition too. So did box 3. So did box 9 and box 14 and the whole first shelf, and by the time I'd worked through 20 of them, I understood that these weren't errors, because errors don't agree with each other. 20 boxes, 20 different case numbers, 20 different dates, and every single date came after the building those cases were supposedly filed in stopped existing. A gravel lot doesn't take in evidence. I want you to understand that I looked for the ordinary answer. I looked hard. Maybe Halsted Street Station was a database label, a routing code they'd kept alive after the physical station closed, the way a company keeps a dead man's email address on so the auto replies still work. Maybe the cases were real, filed at a different building, just tagged with the old station's name out of bureaucratic inertia. That was a good theory. I held on to it for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I found the log. Every box has a chain of custody sheet. It rides inside the lid, and it's the most boring document in the world. A grid of names and dates and signatures tracking every hand the evidence passed through. Clerk received it. Detective checked it out. Lab checked it in. And so on, a paper history of an object nobody wanted to touch. The sheets in these boxes were filled out. Signed. Real handwriting, real pen, the kind of variation you don't get from a printer. Different pressures, different slants, people in a hurry, and people being careful. And the officer who signed for intake over and over on box after box was the same man. R. Calder, property clerk, badge 2214. I typed his name into the county's public directory that night from my apartment. It took me an hour, because I kept expecting to find a living person, and I kept not finding one. What I found, eventually, was a short article in the archive of the local paper. Randall Calder had been the property clerk at Halsted Street Station for 19 years. He died of a heart attack in the evidence room. 14 years ago, 3 years before the earliest date on the sheets he'd signed. I sat in my kitchen with the laptop open and the same feeling I'd had holding the purse, except it had changed shape. It wasn't the satisfaction of catching an error anymore. It was the specific cold you get when two facts you trust refuse to fit in the same room, and you start to wonder which one you got wrong about the world. I didn't sleep well, but I went back. The money was real, and I told myself that as long as the money was real, the rest was somebody else's problem to explain. I've thought about that a lot since, about how much strangeness a person will walk past if you pay them enough, and tell them it's not their job to ask. I should tell you about my brother, because you're going to need to know, and because I've spent 11 years not telling anyone. His name was Marcus. He was 2 years younger than me. When we were kids, he was the one who couldn't sit still, the one who took things apart to see the inside of them and never got the outside back together. And our mother used to say he'd either fix the world or break it, and there was no telling which. There's a thing I remember from when he was maybe 7 and I was 9. He wandered off at a county fair, the way he wandered off everywhere, and I spent 40 minutes going up and down the rows of stalls with my heart in my throat before I found him sitting under a generator truck, perfectly calm, watching the engine turn. He'd never once been scared of being lost. "I knew you'd look," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world, and he took my hand and we walked back, and I never told our mother. That was the arrangement between us, unspoken and permanent. He got lost. I looked. I always looked. Our father wasn't around, and after the stroke, it was mostly the three of us pretending it wasn't. Marcus was the one who moved back in for those last 2 years, cooked for her, learned to fix her hair the way she liked when her right hand stopped cooperating, sat with her through the bad nights. I sent money and called on Sundays and told myself that was the same thing. It wasn't. He did the holding. I did the looking in from a distance, which is a thing I have always been better at than I should be. He didn't do either. He just left. Or that's what the police decided. One October, he stopped answering his phone, and when I let myself into his apartment, his keys and wallet were on the counter, and his car was in the lot, and his shoes were by the door, and none of that mattered, because a grown man is allowed to disappear. That's what they told me. No sign of a struggle, no note, no body, no crime, an adult who walked away. I didn't believe it. I filed the report at Halstead Street Station because that was his precinct, and I gave a detective named Witt a photograph and a description and every detail I could think of, and the detective was kind and thorough and completely permanently useless. The case never closed because it never really opened. Marcus became a number in a system, and then the station that held the number got knocked down, and I told myself the number went somewhere. The last time he called me was the week before, a Tuesday. I was busy. I was always busy in those days, busy being nowhere important, and I let it ring out and told myself I'd call back that night. He left a voicemail. I never listened to it. I never called back. By the time I thought of it again, he was already not answering his phone, and then he was a case number. And the little red dot on my screen, that meant one unheard message sat there for months until I traded the phone in, and it was gone. I have spent 11 years not letting myself wonder what he might have said. That's the part I've never told anyone. Not the detective, not our mother before she passed. No one. I let my brother go to voicemail, and then I let him go. I never found out where. I stopped looking the way you stop pressing a bruise, not because it healed, but because you got tired of finding out it hadn't. I'm telling you this now, so you understand what it did to me, on the 9th day, to open a box and find my brother's name on the sheet. The case number meant nothing. The date was recent. That same impossible after the building band of years. Inside was a phone. Not sealed the way the older items were, just bagged, tagged, and logged with a chain of custody sheet, and on the sheet, in the description field, in ordinary blue pen, personal effects, M. Roeder, recovered. I have a common last name. I told myself that immediately before I'd even finished reading. Roeder isn't rare. There are Roeders in the phone book, Roeders in 3 counties. M. Roeder could be Michael, Mary, Monica, anyone. I told myself that with my hands already shaking, which is how I knew I didn't believe it. The phone was Marcus's. I knew it the way you know a face across a crowded room before you've consciously recognized it. It was the right model for the right year, an old thing, scratched in the same place his always was because he kept it in the same pocket as his keys and never learned. There was a sticker on the back, half peeled. A band we'd seen together the summer before he went, at a show where he'd spilled a beer down my back and laughed so hard he had to sit down on the curb. I stood in that cold room holding my brother's phone, 11 years after he vanished, logged into evidence by a man who'd been dead for 14, filed at a building that no longer existed. And the intake date was 6 weeks ago. I didn't log it. That was my first mistake, or maybe my first act of sanity. I still can't decide. The rule was that you log a box when you open it. I didn't. I put the lid back on and I carried it. You don't remove a box from the floor, but I carried it 2 aisles over and I sat on the concrete with my back against the shelving and I tried to breathe. Here's what I kept coming back to. If the phone was here, somebody brought it here. Evidence doesn't file itself. A dead clerk's signature is impossible, but a phone is not impossible. A phone is a real object made of glass and metal. And 6 weeks ago, somebody had held my brother's phone in their hands and written his name on a form, which meant somebody knew where my brother had been for 11 years. I turned the phone on. I shouldn't have. Every instinct I'd built in 15 years of this work screamed at me not to. You don't power on evidence. You don't alter it. You don't touch it outside of protocol. But he was my brother, and the battery had a charge it should not have had after 11 years or even 6 weeks, and the screen lit up. No passcode. Just the home screen, the same wallpaper he'd always used, a photo of the 2 of us and our mother at some lake I couldn't place, and a single notification, waiting, 1 missed call, time-stamped that morning, from a contact saved in his phone as Danny. That's me. Nobody has called me Danny since I was a child except my brother. And the number the call had come from was my number. My current number, the one I've had for 6 years. A number Marcus could not possibly have had because it didn't exist when he disappeared. I had not called that phone. I hadn't known it existed until an hour before. I put it back in the box. I badged out early. I sat in my car in the empty lot until my hands stopped shaking. And then they didn't stop, so I drove home with them shaking. I almost didn't go back. I want that on the record. I sat in my apartment for a day and a half, and I composed 3 different emails to Miss Ferreira quitting, and I deleted all 3, and the reason I deleted them was not the money. It was that I finally understood what the job was. I'd been thinking about it wrong. I'd been treating the impossible dates like errors, like the point was to catch them and correct the record. But Alvarez had told me on the first morning in words I'd heard and not understood, don't fix it, log it. The discrepancy log wasn't for corrections. Nobody was ever going to correct these. The county wasn't paying me double to make a clean spreadsheet. They were paying me to witness, to take the impossible boxes as they arrived, one after another, and write down that they were real. To make a record that a human being had seen these objects and confirmed they existed. That was the whole job. Chain of custody. Somebody has to hold the thing and sign that they held it, or it isn't real. It's just a claim. And that's what I couldn't walk away from, because somewhere in that building was proof that my brother hadn't simply walked away. Proof that something had recovered him. That word 6 weeks ago, and I was the only person who might ever hold it in his hands and confirm that it was real. So, I went back. Of course I went back. I think they knew I would. I think that's why they hired a man with a common last name and a brother in the system and a bruise he'd never stopped pressing. I don't think Ms. Ferreira found me by accident. I think I was on a manifest somewhere long before I ever signed one. The extra boxes started that week. The ones not on the manifest. The ones Alvarez said to note and ignore. The first appeared at the end of my aisle on a Thursday night, a little after 11. I know it hadn't been there at 10 because I'd walked that aisle at 10. No cart, no sound, no delivery. A brown box, identical to the others, sitting square in the middle of the concrete, as if it had been set down carefully by someone who then left without a footstep. I logged it in the discrepancy book, hands steady now, because I was learning. Then I opened it, because I couldn't not. Inside was a child's shoe, a jacket, and a wristwatch, each bagged, each with a sheet. 3 people, 3 case numbers, 3 intake dates in the impossible band, and I recognized none of them, and that was almost worse, because it meant this wasn't about me. It was so much bigger than me. There were hundreds of boxes, and each one was a person, and each person was recovered, and each of them had somebody out in the world still pressing a bruise, telling themselves the number went somewhere. The number went here. This is where the numbers went. Over the next 2 weeks, I found more. Every extra box was people who'd gone missing. I started keeping my own list on my phone, the case numbers and the intake dates, and, where I could find them, the names. And I started to see the shape of it. The intake dates weren't random. They came in a slow, steady rhythm, a few a week, stretching from 3 years after the station closed all the way up to the present, as if the station, wherever it now was, had never stopped working. As if it were still out there somewhere, taking people in, cataloging them, one careful box at a time. And the intake dates kept getting closer to today. The most recent one I found was dated 4 days in the future. I need to tell you about the recording because it's the part I understand least, and the part I think about most. In one of the extra boxes, buried under an old raincoat, there was a cassette. An actual cassette tape, the kind nobody's made in decades, with a strip of masking tape on it, and 2 words in blue pen. Intake, Roeder. Not M. Roeder. Just Roeder. I found a machine to play it on. There was an old dictation recorder in a supply drawer. The annex was full of dead technology, and I took it into the far corner of the floor where the cameras didn't reach, and I put in the tape, and I pressed play with my thumb because my index finger wouldn't stop trembling. It was a room tone first. A big, cold room, the same specific silence I was standing in. Then a voice. A man's voice, tired, reading a form the way Alvarez read his rules. Intake interview. Subject is cooperative. Subject understands the terms. Then a second voice answered, and the second voice was my brother's. Older than I remembered. Rougher. But his. I'd know it underwater, under years, under anything. I don't understand the terms, Marcus said. I keep telling you, I don't understand. You will, the first voice said. Everyone does eventually. It's a chain of custody, son. Something has to hold you. Something has to sign for you. Otherwise, you're just loose. A pause. Paper moving. You had someone looking for you. That helps. It's easier when someone's still looking. The looking is what keeps you real enough to file. My brother, Marcus said. Danny. Your brother stopped looking, the first voice said. Not cruelly. Gently, even. You stopped being real. That's why it took so long. We can only recover what someone's still holding on to. You'd gone very faint, Marcus. You'd almost gone all the way. And my brother's voice, small, said, Is he still out there? He's closer than you think, the first voice said. He's coming to file the rest of you. He just doesn't know it yet. The tape ran out. It clicked and hissed and went to silence, and I sat on the cold floor in the corner where the cameras couldn't see me, and I understood the sentence at the bottom of the manifest, the one I'd read 4 times. Discrepancies are to be logged, not corrected. I was the discrepancy. I'd stopped looking for Marcus 11 years ago. I'd let him go faint. And the job, the money, the manifest, my name on the second page. The job was to make me start looking again, hard enough, close enough, that the thing in that building could finally recover him all the way, The looking is what keeps you real enough to file. I had spent 2 weeks holding my brother's evidence in my hands and confirming it was real. I had been signing for him. I want to tell you I ran. I want to tell you I put the tape down and walked out and never went back, called the FBI, called the papers, saved myself. But that's not what happened, and I promised I'd tell this in order, and in order the next thing that happened is that I looked at the time on my phone. It was 1:52 in the morning. I had never stayed past 2. Every night since the first I'd been out of that building by 1 at the latest, home in my shaking hands and my locked door. I hadn't noticed the hours. The tape, my brother's voice, the corner where the cameras couldn't see. I'd lost track, and now it was 1:52, and Alvarez's last rule was the loudest thing in my head. If you're still here at 2, you stop logging. You leave anything you're holding on the table. You do not sign anything into the system after 2. I had my brother's phone in my jacket pocket. I'd taken it out of its box 3 days before, and I hadn't put it back. I'd been carrying it, holding on to it, the way you hold on to a person, and I hadn't logged it. It wasn't in the system. According to the record, I'd never opened that box. At 1:54, the extra box appeared at the end of my aisle. No sound. I was watching the aisle this time, and it was simply there between one blink and the next, brown and square and waiting, and I knew before I reached it whose it was, because I knew what the system was still hungry for, and I knew it was closer than I'd let myself think. The sheet inside said Roeder, D. The intake date was today's date. The description field, in ordinary blue pen, in handwriting I'd been staring at for 2 weeks, the handwriting of a man dead 14 years, said, Personal effects. Subject located. Awaiting intake signature. The box was empty except for the sheet. It was waiting for me to fill it. It was waiting for me to log myself in, to take the pen and confirm and sign and become real enough to file. The looking had worked. I'd come all the way in. I was the last discrepancy on the manifest, and the manifest doesn't correct discrepancies. It holds them. 1:57. I thought about why I did what I did next. I'd like to say it was courage. It wasn't. It was the phone in my pocket, and the missed call, and my brother's voice on the tape asking, is he still out there? And the man answering, he's coming to file the rest of you. The rest of you. Not just Marcus. All of them. Every box, every shoe, every child's jacket, every faint person somebody had almost stopped looking for. If I signed myself in, the chain closed. I became part of the record instead of the one holding it, and then there'd be no witness left. No one to hold the boxes and confirm they were real in the other direction, the human direction, the world's direction. No one left looking. So I didn't sign. I took the pen and I did the only thing the job had ever actually asked of me. I logged the discrepancy. In the discrepancy book in my own handwriting at 1:58 in the morning, I wrote, Box unmanifested. Contents, 1 intake sheet, subject D. Roeder. Discrepancy noted, not corrected, not signed, and I closed the book. Then I took my brother's phone out of my pocket and I set it on the table in the open, the way Alvarez said to leave anything you were holding. I left it because I understood, finally, that as long as I held it, I was signing for him. And as long as I was signing, I was being pulled toward that empty box with my name on it, to stay real, to keep looking from the outside, where it does some good. I had to stop holding him. I had to let him be a thing in a box, and not a thing in my hand. I put it down at 1:59. And at 2:00, the fluorescent hum stopped. Not the lights. The lights stayed on. Just the hum. The sound you forget you're hearing until it's gone, and in the enormous silence that replaced it I heard, from somewhere deep in the shelving, a drawer roll open, then another. Then a sound like a great many boxes being lifted at once by hands I could not see, all across that room, the system doing its sync, taking in everything that had been signed for that night. I did not wait to see if the empty box got lifted with them. I badged out. My card worked. The door opened. I walked to my car across the empty lot under a sky going gray at the edge, and I drove home with steady hands, and I have never gone back. The contract said 3 months. I quit after 19 days. Ms. Ferreira never called to ask why. That's the part that tells me I was right about all of it. That a normal employer calls when you walk off a job, and she didn't. Because I'd done exactly what I was there to do, or exactly failed to, and either way, they were finished with me. I tried her number one more time before I let it all go. The long, flat tone again. A phone off the hook in an empty room. I have come to think that's the only room she was ever calling from. The annex isn't at that address anymore. I drove out one afternoon a few weeks later, and the low gray building was still there, but the number by the door was gone, and the card reader was gone, and the drywall around where it had been was painted over, smooth, like it had never been touched. I did look for Alvarez once, near the end, before I understood it's better not to look for certain things. There was no Mr. Alvarez on any county payroll, but there was a Raymond Alvarez in the list I'd copied off the sheets. Recovered. Intake dated 2 years before I ever walked through that door. Heavyset, 60. A contract archivist, the paperwork said. The one before me. He'd worked the floor for a season, cataloging the impossible, and then one night he'd stayed past 2. I understood then why he'd looked so tired handing me the rules. Why he'd said he was glad they'd found somebody. He wasn't an employee showing me the ropes. He was the last one who'd held the boxes, let out for a single night to put the pen in the next witness's hand so the chain wouldn't break. He'd told me not to sign after 2, the way a man tells you the one thing he wishes someone had told him. And I hadn't listened, not really, until it was almost me. I don't tell people this story. I'm telling it now because of the thing that came in the mail. It's been almost a year. Most days I'm fine. Most days it's a bad dream I had once, and I've almost stopped looking at it, almost let it go faint, which I now understand is the most dangerous thing a person can do. But 3 days ago, there was a box on my doorstep. Brown, square. No return address, no shipping label, no postage. Just my name on top in blue pen, in handwriting I'd know underwater, under years, under anything. Inside was my brother's phone. It has a charge it should not have. And when I turned it on, there was a missed call waiting from a contact saved as Danny, time-stamped 4 days from now. There was something else. Under the missed call in the voicemail folder, there were 2 messages. The first was 11 years old, the one I never listened to. The one he left the Tuesday before he stopped answering. That sat unheard on a phone I traded in and threw away. On a phone that should not exist, that I am now holding in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. I played it. I owed him that much, finally. 31 seconds of my brother's voice, tired and ordinary, telling me nothing was wrong. He just wanted to talk. Call him back when I got the chance. No hurry, he said. Then, right at the end, quieter, like he'd already half hung up. You'd look for me, though. Right, Danny? If it came to it, you'd look. I never called back. I want that in the record, too. The second voicemail is dated 6 days from now. I haven't played it. I don't know how a message can be left before it's spoken, and I don't know whose voice is on it, and I am afraid of both answers. But every morning since the box arrived, the date on it moves 1 day nearer, the same as the missed call. The 2 of them walking toward me across the calendar at exactly the same pace. So I've started looking again. Really looking, for the first time in years, at the case numbers I saved, at the names, at the shape of the thing. Because I think it's the only move I have left. As long as I'm looking from the outside, holding it all up to the light and refusing to sign, I stay a witness instead of a box. Somewhere out past the industrial park, in a low gray building that isn't at any address, a dead man is filling out a sheet with my name on it, in blue pen, in no hurry at all. Subject located, it says, awaiting intake signature. And a heavy-set man of 60 is waiting his turn to be let out for a single night, to put a pen in the next witness's hand. He can wait. I'm going to keep looking. But the voicemail is closer than it was when I started writing this. One more day gone each morning, steady as a clock, and in the smallest hours I've started to wonder about the voice I'm so afraid to hear on it. Whether it's my brother's, asking again if I'll look, or whether it's mine, telling him I finally did.